What if I told you that the biggest mistake people make in crypto isn't buying too late or selling too early, but misunderstanding what price actually represents? Most people see a number on a screen and assume it reflects truth in real time. But markets don't show truth. They show behavior, and behavior is shaped by structure, incentives, and timing, not by what feels fair or logical in the moment. When people hear a headline like XRP could hit $1,000, the immediate reaction is emotion, excitement for some, anger or disbelief for others, and that reaction alone is exactly why most people miss the deeper conversation entirely, because this isn't about predicting a number, and it's definitely not about telling anyone what to buy or hold. It's about understanding why extreme outcomes are even discussed in the first place, and why most people never slow down long enough to ask that question. Before we go any further, let me be clear. This is not financial advice. Nothing here is a promise, a guarantee, or a prediction. Markets are uncertain, volatile, and influenced by factors no single person controls. This is an educational discussion meant to help you think more clearly, not react more emotionally. Now here's the real hook most people miss. Price is not value. Price is behavior under pressure. Every asset you've ever seen move dramatically didn't do so because everyone suddenly agreed it was worth more. It moved because the structure around it changed. Liquidity shifted, access expanded, rules evolved, or demand met a bottleneck. XRP exists at the intersection of all of those forces. Most cryptocurrencies were designed to exist outside the traditional financial system. XRP was designed to interact with it. That one difference changes the entire conversation because traditional finance doesn't scale emotionally. It scales structurally. Banks don't chase hype. Institutions don't react to tweets. Payment networks don't redesign themselves because something is trending. They move when systems prove reliable, compliant, and efficient over long periods of time. That process is slow, painfully slow, and to retail investors watching daily charts, slow often looks like failure, but slow and useless are not the same thing. XRP was built to solve a specific problem, inefficient movement of value across borders. That problem still exists. It exists at massive scale, and it costs the global economy billions every year in delays, fees, and friction. Now, here's where things get uncomfortable. If a digital asset were ever to be used as a serious bridge between currencies, its price would not be driven primarily by retail speculation. It would be driven by liquidity requirements, and liquidity requirements don't care what feels reasonable. Liquidity is about how much value can move through an asset without breaking the system. That's where people start throwing around extreme numbers, not because they expect them tomorrow, but because they're trying to model what happens if usage changes categories entirely. Most people argue about price without ever asking, price for what purpose? A meme coin needs attention. A store of value narrative needs belief, but a settlement asset needs depth. It needs reliability under pressure. It needs to function when volume spikes, not collapse. XRP's supply structure, speed, and transaction cost profile were built with that in mind. Whether it succeeds or not is still an open question, but the design intent matters. Now let's talk about the phrase, you need to hold, because this is where YouTube gets dangerous. No one needs to do anything with their money. Ever. The moment someone tells you that you must hold, buy, or sell, they've crossed from education into manipulation. What people usually mean, whether they realize it or not, is that long-term systems don't reward short-term thinking. Holding in this context isn't about loyalty, it's about time alignment. Most retail participants operate on emotional timeframes, days, weeks, maybe months. Infrastructure operates on years, sometimes decades. When those two collide, frustration is guaranteed. This is why so many people feel like markets are rigged. Not because they are secretly controlled, but because participants are operating on completely different clocks. XRP has survived long periods of regulatory pressure, public doubt, and narrative fatigue. That alone puts it in a different category than most digital assets that disappear the moment momentum fades. Survival doesn't mean success is guaranteed, but it does mean the system is resilient. Another uncomfortable truth, price often moves the most when no one is paying attention anymore. By the time something feels obvious, the asymmetry is usually gone. That's why extreme price discussions tend to surface during quiet periods. Not because something is about to happen immediately, but because the range of possible futures is still wide. Markets compress possibility before they expand price, and this is where most people lose patience. They want validation now, they want confirmation now, they want movement now, but systems don't care about impatience. If you're still listening, take a second and tap the like button. It tells the platform that calm, long-form thinking still matters. And if you want more discussions like this, without hype, without panic, make sure you're subscribed, because the loudest voices rarely understand the system they're shouting about. Now, here's the part most people won't say out loud. If XRP were ever to be used at large institutional scale, the question wouldn't be, can the price go up? It would be, what price allows the system to function efficiently? That's a completely different conversation. High prices aren't bullish by default. They're sometimes necessary. A higher unit price can reduce required liquidity, lower slippage, and stabilize settlement at scale. That doesn't mean it will happen. It means that when people model outcomes, they're not always modeling speculation. They're modeling mechanics, and mechanics don't care about your emotions. The reason numbers like $1,000 shock people is because they're anchored to retail thinking. They imagine buying a token and becoming rich. That's not how institutional systems work. Institutions don't care how many tokens you own. They care about throughput, reliability, compliance, and risk exposure. This is why it's dangerous to mix retail dreams with infrastructure realities. The truth sits somewhere in between. XRP's future is not guaranteed. No assets is. But dismissing conversations simply because they sound extreme is just as lazy as believing them blindly. Critical thinking lives in the middle, and the middle is uncomfortable because it doesn't give you certainty. It gives you context. If you're watching this hoping for a signal, you won't get one. If you're watching this hoping for clarity, you're in the right place. Because markets don't reward excitement, they reward understanding, and that's where the conversation naturally deepens, because once you step away from the shock of big numbers and slow your thinking down, you start seeing the market less like a casino and more like a system. Systems don't explode overnight, they evolve layer by layer, rule by rule, constraint by constraint, and XRP, whether people love it or hate it, has been evolving under constraints most digital assets have never faced. One of the biggest misunderstandings around XRP is the idea that its past struggles somehow disqualify its future. In reality, those struggles are exactly why it's still being watched. Most projects never face serious pressure. They fade before pressure ever arrives. XRP was forced into the spotlight early, forced to defend its structure, forced to clarify its role, and forced to survive while the rules of the game were still being written. That kind of stress test changes how an asset is perceived over time. When people ask, why would XRP ever need to be priced that high? They're usually asking the wrong question. The more accurate question is, under what conditions would higher valuation become functionally relevant? Because price doesn't exist in isolation. It exists in relation to volume, velocity, and purpose. If an asset is meant to move value, not store it, then its price becomes part of its efficiency equation. Lower priced assets require more units to move the same amount of value. More units mean more friction, more exposure, more complexity. At small scale, that doesn't matter. At global scale, it matters a lot. This is not an argument that XRP will reach any specific number. It's an explanation of why the conversation exists at all. Most retail investors never think about liquidity stress. They think about upside. Institutions think about what happens when volume spikes unexpectedly, when markets are thin, or when settlement needs to happen instantly across multiple jurisdictions. That's a very different mindset. Another thing rarely discussed is how perception lags reality. When infrastructure changes, the public rarely notices until it's already embedded. Most people don't know how payment systems work today, and they won't know how they change tomorrow. They'll just notice that things feel faster, cheaper, or smoother.